Okay, good evening, everyone. Tonight we are streaming in English since our guest is a very special person from the US. Um, I, I, I think we will put subtitles in the next video, or we'll edit this later. So those who can't, who are not really good at in English, will be able to to follow the interview. Um, well, let me introduce our guest tonight. Is His name is Dakotah Lilly. He's an activist and an analyst from Pennsylvania who received his bachelor arts degree in political science from the New School. I suppose that's the New School of Social Research. Am I wrong?
It's the same entity, yeah.
Okay, okay. He specialized in the socialismo del siglo XXI, 21st century socialism, Chavismo, populism, political economics, and he has also been featured on Press TV, the Iranian news broadcaster, the Telesur, Russia Today, Counterpunch, Mint Press, Cindy Sheehan's Soapbox, Red Lettuce, and many others. And he is also a really frequent traveler to Venezuela. Dakotah, welcome. How are you tonight?
I'm much better now. Thank you for having me, Carlos.
Great. So our first question is on what is the current state of the left wing in the US? I've seen that you belong to a group that has an anti-imperialist orientation and also sponsors solidarity with, blocked countries such as Venezuela and Cuba and Iran and so on. So, but is it that this group can you see it as the future of the left in the United States, or you think there's more work pending on it?
Well, to begin to answer your question, the state of the left in the United States, in one word in Spanish and also English, is terrible. It's awful. We haven't, the highest achievement, that we've had, if you can, call it that much of an achievement, was the election of a socialist city council member in Seattle, Kashama Swan, years ago. And they've been able to do some really good things there economically, but that's one city in one state in one region in the United States, and the rest of the left really doesn't have much traction in this country for a multitude of reasons, I would say. I think there's a huge co-option of the left movement in the United States by neoliberal identity politics. I think they have effectively neutered and taken away the teeth of the left by making them focus on things like, which a lot of times in the United States we call wedge issues that wedge people apart from each other, because at the end of the day, there's hundreds of millions of workers in this country, but they're not all going to agree on Black Lives Matter. They're not all going to agree on abortion or gay marriage or things like that. But what they can all agree on is that their wages haven't increased, that their rent is going up, they can't send their kids to school, et cetera, et cetera. And I believe that the left in this country has said to those that have perhaps a reactionary position on these social issues, they've said, forget them. We don't care about them, and we're just going to continue going with people who already agree with us. And I think for any political ideology or party or organization, that's a death sentence. To dismiss the tens of millions of people that voted for Donald Trump, for example, as racists, as stupid deplorables, as Hillary Clinton said. Not to say that Hillary Clinton is part of the left, obviously not, but they've failed to reach those people. And Donald Trump, for all of his faults, talked to a lot of the issues that are facing American workers. He said he wanted to make the Republican Party a workers' party. He said, he wanted to bring jobs back. He wanted to make manufacturing, a cornerstone of the American economy again. And he spoke about the opioid epidemic in this country, which is killing millions of workers every year. And Hillary Clinton said, things are fine. We don't need to change these things. Things are going swimmingly. And perhaps that was part of her job description because she came after another Democrat, Barack Obama. But all these people who voted for Trump, it was, I think one of the most spot-on analyses of why Trump won was from Argentine Vice President Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, when she said it was a protest vote. It was people who have seen their lives, their social systems, etc., decimated, the foreclosure crisis, and they wanted to break with the economic establishment, she said. And she's 100% right, and I believe that's what happened. Now, hopefully, my organization and some of the things that I participate in, like Students and Youth for a New America and the Center for Political Innovation, can kind of fill that void, because I believe that a lot of the left in the United States has a goal of being the largest contingency in the protest cage. And I don't think that's a long-term or a good goal, because you can protest and protest and protest, but what are we going to do to change the lives, the material conditions of the working class in this country, and hopefully of workers internationally? That's something that I think people need to start actually thinking about. And I think that, there is an American tradition, a tradition in the United States of protest. We have Eugene Debs, we have William Z. Foster, we have the Populist Party, we have these agrarian people, which began in the South and in Kansas, standing up against bankers and the railroad corporations, etc. That's the Americanism that we want to speak to. That's what we want to bring back into the public sphere in terms of the American people. It can't be between, racists and liberals, which are essentially, at the end of the day, agree on far much more than they know of. It has to be the workers against the oligarchy. And I think while we organize along these lines, we should also try to educate and agitate in terms of more progressive social issues. But it shouldn't be the end of any sort of political organization or inclusion. So I hope that's what my organization will become in the coming years, but it's still very young. We're living in incredibly strange times between Joe Biden and Donald Trump and COVID-19. We have our work cut out for us, and I think that's the left in every single country in the world.
I really agree with what you say, and I think it's an issue with most of the left, not just in the United States. It's most of the Western world left. I mean, here in Chile, we also have this, sort of cartoonish debate between, really ultra religious, conservative, right-wing people and, ultra liberal, progressive, postmodern leftists. And at the end of the day, both of these tendencies or both of these positions, they can perfectly live under a capitalist system. I mean, there's no real opposition to capital. There's no real opposition to the oligarchy. It's just, rhetoric and, protests, and it's more for, like a spectacle. Mm-hmm. But I guess what your group and I mean we as well in Chile and you in the United States, what we try is to connect with the people, with the populist, populist in a good sense, with the deep roots and traditions of our respective peoples. For example, you have your own culture, and there is a long standing defense of freedom in the United States, whatever that might mean. To like, it's different. The concept of freedom might be different for a left-wing person than to a right-wing person, but nonetheless, the freedom is still there, and that's it's also connected with gun culture and fight against the tyranny or the big government, big state. Um, do you think that there is a way to take these elements and um, move them to the left? Move them to an anti-oligarchy struggle, or an anti-capitalist struggle. Of course, I agree with you that we should also try to keep a progressive mindset and leave behind, racism and all that kind of discrimination based on, sexual identity or sexual preference, or and so on. But still, if we keep in one of these two extremes, um, we will be like we will be stuck in nowhere, in the middle of nowhere. But if we try to combine, the progressive with the traditional, I guess we can improve, the situation for the left in the United States and here in Chile as well. Do you agree with this idea, or could you elaborate more on this thought?
Yeah, I do agree. I think it's very, I mean, if you look at, like, let's take Brazil as an example. Brazil had, these governments of Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff of the Workers' Party, immeasurable social inclusion, really great policies, etc. But when Bolsonaro ran, he said that the communists had destroyed Brazil. He said that, his slogan was Brazil above all, and now that he's president, of course, he's giving away Petrobras and, all these state companies to foreign investors for pennies on the dollar. He's giving away land in Brazil to foreign entities, so that's not nationalism. That's not patriotism. That's surrender. That's surrender to, the international oligarchy, which knows no borders. They will exploit you no matter where you're from and will intend to take down all barriers to their power. So I think we can use, some of these themes to our own advantage. Why is it that the right wing has a monopoly on certain themes? Why is it that they can talk about, law and order when they're the ones that allowed the bankers in 2009 to completely get away with absolutely everything? Not one person ended up in jail. That's not law and order. When they talk about freedom, what about freedom from want? The millions of people who don't have food or running water or sanitation. In this country, in the United States, the so-called most powerful and richest country in the world, we have outbreaks of hookworm, poverty-ridden diseases, and, Texas, the absolute failure of the state of Texas in the face of inclement weather, of all things, So, and these are things like what happened in Texas that should have been, forgive the terrible conditions, but that should have been a gold mine for socialist agitation and activism. That should have been a way for the, hundreds of socialist organizations in this country to go down and say, why is it that we shouldn't have public ownerships of utilities? Why isn't that we shouldn't have municipal light, municipal water, etc.? Why is it that we have a government with Democrats and Republicans, the two main parties in this country? And the same thing happens whether you're in Texas or you're in California. There will be blackouts. There will be people who are on life support who would get shut off, and you will die, no matter the party in power. So I think there's a lot of things that we can bring back that I think the left can take advantage of. I also think it's, the left has shot itself in the foot in a lot of different ways. I think that they have, a lot of them, and this isn't just the United States, it's also, I've seen a lot in Europe. They've kind of, when it comes to cancel culture and the wokeness and things like that, they're so scared of saying anything like in Germany, the Die Linke party with Sarah Wagenknecht, a very great left-wing economist who is, extremely left-wing, she got in a lot of trouble because she said that Germany shouldn't take in unlimited amounts of refugees, and that was seen as this terrible fascist viewpoint. I don't think any country could take in an unlimited amount of refugees. I think it would be a strain on jobs. I think it would be a strain on the social state. I think, there's a lot of things that go into that I think we just kind of brush to the side in favor of multiculturalism or this, that, or the other. And there's nothing wrong with multiculturalism, but if millions of people are unemployed in Germany, people are going to be upset when they see their government taking in refugees when they aren't taken care of, and that's not an incorrect position to take. Furthermore, we have, back when Trump did the Muslim ban on the select number of countries saying no more people are, able to immigrate, people went to airports and they held protests that said refugees welcome, etc. Which, again, that's one thing, but why isn't that we're not connecting it to why are there so many refugees? Why did the United States intervene in 2011 in Libya? Why did they create these millions of refugees from Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan, etc.? Those are the questions I'd rather have asked rather than just say, yes, let's open the doors, open the floodgates, allow anyone and everyone to come in without asking questions. I don't think that's good for a German worker, an American worker, or a French worker. And I think the left has a duty to say what is true, even if the prevailing neoliberal hegemonic means of communication, etc., are saying that can't be said.
Yeah, I think it's a pity that things that are common sense are being censored in this way. Even if it comes from left-wing, politician or leader, this person will be afraid of, taking such measures or proposing such measures, because then the public eye or, the media will immediately start, making this mob type of canceling, and it's sad. It is a type of totalitarianism. I think it's a totalitarian culture, and it is. I think it's a sub-product of capitalism as well. Capitalism is behaving in a really totalitarian way. I don't support Donald Trump in any way, but I kind of agree that the censorship they made of his web page, his Facebook site, his Twitter account, that's like you can see that the narrative of freedom of speech under capitalism it's fake.
Absolutely.
Because you don't have freedom. You are under control of big companies, of big corporations, and so I can see, if Americans value so much their freedom, they should act against the greatest enemy of freedom, that's capitalism.
Exactly. And I think we've had, I've seen some people who call themselves part of the left, applauding what's happening with Donald Trump's accounts, etc. But, the same methods have been used against the left for a very, very long time. I've been banned on Twitter twice. They've restricted Venezuelan government accounts, which were responsible for providing information about COVID. And you haven't seen this same outpour of indignation by those same people who call themselves the left. But yeah, like you said, I think a lot of the right, when it comes to freedom, 10 years ago, well, a little bit more than 10 years ago, during George Bush, the big thing was we have to invade Iraq and we have to invade Afghanistan to preserve freedom of the United States, etc. But obviously that wasn't true. And I think most people knew that wasn't true. But where were the people saying that the freedom from all these terrible social ills that I was talking about is a much more pressing issue than somehow our freedoms ending up in Baghdad or Kabul, it's a very easy way for neoliberalism to kind of co-opt these things that are very agreeable in nature, things like freedom, things like liberty, things like equality, etc. And a lot of what they do, especially in this age, is they've used some of the things that liberals love to talk about, they weaponize them. Like, I'm totally in favor of women's rights, but there's no doubt that neoliberalism and capitalism, as well as imperialism, have said, the women in Syria aren't, as free as in the United States. The women of Iran, etc., and using this as a justification for intervention by the United States government. So you have to be weary of these things. I think it's a complete mistake to just say anything that's a progressive issue should go under the radar and should be absolutely fine. Even sorry if you hear my dog barking. Even things like open borders, like that's something that the right has made #1 issue all across Europe and in the United States, when very few people are speaking about open borders. So we have to be very vigilant in speaking about these things.
Yes. Talking about, those issues hijacked by the right wing, there's also the question of national pride, like patriotism and such. Do you see a patriotic left wing in the United States? Is it possible? Or how do you harmonize this with anti-imperialism? Because it's hard to be a patriot in a country that whose government is invading other countries. So it's how would you focus this left-wing patriotism in America?
Well, I would say that the idea of left-wing patriotism should be not, especially in countries that have imperialist tentacles around the world, should be not so much loyalty or patriotism of the entity that is the United States, but more so the people of the United States, the workers of the United States. It's not about excusing the terrible things that the United States government has done, but to separate the government from the people, I think, is a very, very important thing to do. And I think whenever Nicolás Maduro speaks about the United States, he says, we love the people of the United States. They are workers. They're brothers in arms and struggle for social justice, inclusion, etc. But the government, which is hijacked by these hyper-capitalist, imperialist madmen, is a completely different story. And so I feel that, especially in the United States, you have to kind of, if you want a sort of left-wing patriotism or you want something like that, you have to separate the two. On top of that, I think the left in this country is so out of touch in this regard. You have, whenever people say, maybe I want a socialist United States, it is inevitable that someone will comment or say something, we need to decolonize, we need to give all the land back to Native Americans, we need to, the United States won't be a thing under socialism, and perhaps there's some things to be said, but are you going to tell the people that live in Kansas or, Sacramento or Pittsburgh, hey, you're going to have to give your land back to Native Americans? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Not only that, but you have people that want to supposedly gain power in the United States burning the flag of the United States. You have people who want to gain power in the United States saying, I'm not patriotic, I don't like this country, I want to dismantle this country. I have never in my life heard of any sort of organization, movement, entity, think tank, etc., attain any semblance of political power by saying it wants to destroy the thing it wants to be at the head of. That doesn't make sense. And I think, a lot of people have kind of figured that out. If you look at the debates in France, for example, between Marine Le Pen and Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the Marine Le Pen being, the nationalist right, and Mélenchon being the quote-unquote nationalist left, you reconcile these things by making it there's a very big difference, I believe, in chauvinism and internationalist patriotism. You know, there hasn't been an international action that the United States has participated in that I haven't opposed so far. You know, but at the same time, I do believe that the people of this country deserve a lot better. You know, I don't think that people should degrade those that they claim to support, that the people that they claim to want to lead, or the people that they claim to be in the trenches with. I don't think that makes any sense. And I think it's just so out of step. You know, you could go to the hallways of an Ivy League institution, a very liberal institution, and people would say, yeah, you know, nations are, you know, obsolete. Like, you can't see borders from planes. We're just all, you know, we're just all one. But that's not the reality for most people, and that's not the way most people think. And you know, we shouldn't trail people, but I don't think there's any benefit to saying, you know, things like that. And I just don't see it getting us any closer to actually being able to materially change the things that people overseas need the United States to do, such as lift blockades, lift sanctions, etc., as well as in the United States, where people would benefit from, you know, a more planned economy, etc.
Do you see a more, you know, patriotic tending left or left leaning? Because I mean, it's really hard to talk about left in the United States, but you know, slightly left leaning figure in Tulsi Gabbard. Do you see that in her?
Yeah, I think she is probably the most prominent at the national, probably the closest definition on the national stage, you know. And obviously this isn't like, she's no socialist, she's no anti-imperialist or anything like that, but she has, you know, she is a veteran. I believe she joined in the wake of 9/11. This is someone who probably talks more about patriotism than most other people that were on that Democratic candidate stage, and she's the one that's being smeared as a agent of Russia. So it's a little,
which is a good thing. It's a good thing. Whenever you are called like that, it's because you're doing the things rightly, you know.
Exactly. If Hillary Clinton has a problem with you, you're doing something right. You know, you may not be a Marxist or this, that, or the other, but you're better than Hillary Clinton. So yeah, I think she did, for all of my criticisms of any U.S. politician, she did a lot of things that I think were very important. I think her meeting with Bashar al-Assad was, you know, a fabulous thing. She, of course, you know, backtracked on it later and stuff like that. But yeah, there is totally a way to do that, I think. And I think perhaps that could be used as a little bit of a blueprint, but obviously a more genuine left-wing alternative. And I mean, something like anti-imperialism, something like anti-intervention is not foreign to the people of the United States. They are so tired of war. You know, if you looked at the demonstrations against the Iraq War, against the war in Afghanistan, etc., even, you know, 15 years ago, there was a huge anti-war movement. There was a giant peace movement. The days of humanitarian intervention by the United States directly, I think, is kind of in the past, because I just don't think the population of the United States would be very much into it, one, and I think it would be almost political suicide for any administration or party, lest there be another terrible event like 9/11. But and that's perhaps why we see all of, you know, these more covert things with Syria, why they are funding jihadis, why they're funding the Al-Nusra Front and this, that, or the other. You know, there's no direct, you know, there's not a lot of boots on the ground. There's no full-scale invasion like there was in Iraq and Afghanistan, but they're doing these covert different things, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Iran, whether it's in Somalia or Pakistan, drone strikes, economic warfare against Venezuela and China, etc. So I think there is a very strong anti-war sentiment in most people in the United States. But the problem is it's very hard to listen to someone on the left who says these things, but then in the same breath says, you know, death to the United States, or in the same breath is burning a US flag. You know, they're going to turn away. And that's just, I think, kind of to be expected.
Yes, yes. Talking about national identity in the US, I believe it's really complicated since you have a bunch of different ethnicities, you know, people, immigrants from different backgrounds. And there's also the issue with, you know, racism against African Americans and Native Americans as well. Do you see or do you consider that there is an American national identity? Is there a way to be American in a way that it joins together everyone, or is it that everyone is? I mean, the only thing they have in common is that everyone is different. So, do you see it? Do you see it?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think I would say that my interpretation is very close to the Black Panthers in that, you know, what really define, you know, there are so many different colors and so many different, you know, different attributes to different racial groups, religious groups, etc. But what we can all say is we're all not millionaires. You know, I think there's something class related that I think really connects people. And I think that's a fabulous way to connect people. You know, I think it'll be very hard to convince a lot of people, you know, well, I don't think it's correct in saying, you know, we're all the same. We're all, you know, that's just not true. You know, there are differences. Some people are Black, some people are white, some people are Latino or Mapuche or Navajo, etc. You know, there's a million and one different things. But again, like, we're not trying to disprove that. I think what we're trying to say is that we have a lot more in common with each other than any of us do with anyone who makes that much money and is an oligarch. You know, I have more in common with a worker who is Black than I do with a white person who's an oligarch. And I think, you know, the vice versa is true. I think along all lines, it's true. And I think that's kind of, I think neoliberalism has really kind of figured out that should we employ that, it would be trouble for them. Because if you look at some of the people that they push to the forefront and the people that they amplify, people like Oprah Winfrey, or, you know, they make such a big deal out of representation. You know, all the major defense contractors are women-led, you know, Boeing and Lockheed Martin, and that's supposed to be a good thing. No, they're, you know, oligarchs that make millions and millions of dollars off of making weaponry that kills people all across the world. You know, but you have some of the people who are ultra liberal who are saying, you know, that's fine, like, as long as they're women. We just need more women warmongers. We need more gay murderers. We need more, you know, and it's our job, I believe, to be like, no, we don't. We need no warmongers and no murderers, and we need a workers, a people's government, a people's economy, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the connection is economic in nature, without, because I mean, all other dividing lines are extremely rigid, but when it comes to economic and class related, you know if you're a have and you know if you're a have not. And I think that's something that I think we should build off of.
I think we are in the same page here because, I mean, here in Chile, it's not, you know, the class thing is not as divisive as it is in the States, but still, I think it's you know, more class-oriented kind of struggle. And I think the national identity of the Chileans, you know, the authentic one, is really connected to the working class, to the people, and that's like the authentic Chileans, the ones who have been struggling during the whole of our history. So I think we are in the same page in in this issue. Um, there is another question which I wanted to ask you. We all remember Donald Trump as launching this drone attack on General Soleimani in Iran, and he had a really hostile policy, against the Middle East. And it's the usual American imperialist ethos, but it seems that the progressive left, after Joe Biden's triumph, they all cheer up for this change change from this horrible monster that Trump was to this apparently saintly figure of Joe Biden. So is it that the Americans see Biden as the lesser of two evils, or is it that they actually idealize so much whatever sounds progressive, whatever sounds a bit lefty for American standards, but at the end of the day, Biden's foreign policy isn't so different from Trump's. So is it really the lesser of the two evils, or is it just the same thing with a different clothing?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. I think they have subtle differences. They one might be harder on China, one might be harder on Russia. But it's fundamentally very, very similar. I think there was such a hatred of Donald Trump by the Democrats, because they really believed that they were owed a victory to Hillary Clinton. And I think it just goes to show just how out of touch liberals are. They thought, we did so amazingly. People were doing so amazingly during the Obama years. We gave them this fabulous 6,000-page healthcare bill, which was really just a giant bailout to the pharmaceutical and insurance companies. And they were so shocked when Hillary Clinton was beaten by Donald Trump. And again, let's remember that Trump ran on making the Republican Party a workers' party. He said he wanted to end the wars. He wanted to bring the troops home. And these were winning things. And, they sit around scratching their heads, how could we have been so blind? Meanwhile, they're calling people deplorables, etc. It's very interesting, but I think I think Joe Biden represents the same terrible things that every U.S. president has represented. There is no fundamental change in the capitalist structure. There is no change in the imperialist structure. I mean, look at the foreign policy. It's the same. We've seen airstrikes against Syria, which have killed people. We've seen continuation of recognizing Juan Guaido, a snake oil salesman plucked off the side of the street, as president of Venezuela. Meanwhile, everyone knows who the real president of Venezuela is, especially Venezuelans. So they just take turns. That's really all it is. I think it's very similar to in Venezuela, where they had the Pacto Punto Fijo, where political parties made an agreement to just alternate power in this liberal framework, which, as we all know, is a smokescreen for domination by the workers, by the people, by the oligarchs, and by the plutocracy. Even things that Biden promised, things like direct aid for COVID, $2,000 checks he said would go out the next day. We're still waiting. It's been months. People, millions of Americans are facing foreclosure, facing eviction, and Biden offers nothing different. If you look at it, 17 million less people are eligible for aid under Biden's plan than they were under Trump's plan. So technically, Trump was more generous when it comes to direct aid in the face of COVID-19. And again, there's no love lost between me and Trump or me and Biden. I didn't vote for either of them, and I would never vote for either of them. but it's just an alternating, I forget the author off the top of my head, but there's a fabulous quote, the United States has one party, but in typical US chauvinist fashion, they have two wings of the same party. So there's no fundamental difference. And I believe that most people in the United States know this. If you look at polls, if you look at, most people in this country are not registered with a political party. They're registered independents. If you look at polls of whether we need a new third party, et cetera, people agree. There's a movement here called Movement for a People's Party, which I'm involved in, is swelling with support. So things are bound to change. I really do believe, regardless of what Joe Biden says. He said a group of bankers, quote, nothing will fundamentally change with me as president. He wasn't lying, but with people's power and with us in the seat, I think everything will fundamentally change.
Yes. However, is it really hard to compete against the two American giants, the Democrats and the Republicans? I mean, I believe it's a real great challenge. Do you see this as a long run, victory, or is it, or you see it more in the middle term?
I think it'll be more long-term than middle, but I think we have made some inroads. I think if you look at some of the candidates who are vying for the Democratic nominee, people like Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard, Marianne Williamson, again, all criticism aside, it showed that people really do want something different than the run-of-the-mill Democratic establishment, or just the general establishment. Donald Trump, for all of his faults, represented that same thing when he ran for the Republican nomination. The only difference is he won, and although on the Democratic side did not. So I think it would be naive to believe that it'll happen soon, but I also think it's naive to believe that we can continue on the way that we're going. I also think a lot of the third parties they haven't done what's needed to be done. They haven't done the work that's needed to be done. I think the Movement for a People's Party is probably doing a lot of the work that the Green Party should have been doing for many, many years. I think they were very scared of I think a lot of people are very scared of being spoilers, saying that a vote for a Green is really just a vote for a Republican because you're costing the Democrat the vote. By saying that somehow they own my vote. So I think it's a long-term thing. And I think as, things just keep getting worse. Even when we are in a boom cycle, there's still tens of millions of people struggling with everyday things. It doesn't get any better for people down here on the ground. I always say, I'm a huge Game of Thrones fan. The character Daenerys Targaryen says, there's a wheel that, this one's on top and then that one's on top. I say, Pelosi's on top, then Bush is on top, and then Trump is on top, and on it spins, crushing on the ground. And that's our goal. Shouldn't be to stop the wheel. It should be to break the wheel, to have real fundamental change in this country that was possible at one point. If you look at some of the things that were included in the New Deal, like a second economic Bill of Rights and federal works, all these different things, there have been times when third parties had much more influence. The People's Party, the Socialist Party, even, the Communist Party USA, these attained millions of votes all those years ago. And I believe people are more fed up today than they were then. I think it's kind of just up to us to study, to learn, and agitate and organize as much as we can.
You've been a long supporter of Chavismo and Peronismo as well. And my question is, when did you start to investigate these political streams, and what was your interest on it? What did you find interesting in these, different ideologies? And could you tell us more about your experience?
Well, my political journey began when I was like 13, I'd say. And then by the time I was 15, I was much more radical than I had been 2 years prior. So I always knew about the Bolivarian Revolution. I always supported it, but it wasn't until 2017 that I really started studying and interviewing and watching, etc. A lot of it began with I was invited onto Fox News to speak about Venezuela when they called for a constituent assembly in 2017 in the face of the Guarimbas. And from there, it kind of took off. I had spent a lot of time studying the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc. I had read Towards Soviet America. I had read Cities Without Crisis, and et cetera, et cetera. And they did a good job of explaining certain things, but the Soviet Union hasn't been a country for my entire life. It hasn't been a country for 5 years before I was born. And there has to be something different, because for all these other things, the Soviet Union failed. It's no longer an entity. It stuck around a very long time, but it's no more. And so that kind of led me to researching Chavismo and what Hugo Chavez called socialism of the 21st century, or socialism, or socialismo del siglo XXI. And it's a synthesis of a lot of different ideas, but a lot of it has, it has its roots in a lot of different things, in Marxism, in even Peronism, in Venezuelan traditions, talking about Simón Bolívar and Bolivarianismo, all these different
Catholicism as well, I think.
Yes, Catholicism. Chavez constantly talked about how Jesus was the first socialist, how the Bible could be interpreted as the first communist manifesto, et cetera, et cetera. And these are things that I think, helped him get power in Venezuela, and two, is a blueprint for the rest of us, especially in the Americas. I think that we have, in the United States, we have so much to learn from Allende and Perón and Lula and Chavez and Correa and Kirchner, etc., because, a lot of the left is so idealistic and it's stuck in the past as well. If they're not ultra liberal, then they're stuck in the past, at least in the United States. And these countries, all the countries of which the leaders I just named, are very close culturally to the United States. They're not the same, but they're probably, besides Canada, which is just us light. No offense to my Canadian friends, but it's very religious. It's very Catholic, although here I believe the majority is Protestant. But it's all very Christian and etc. Very machismo. There's a lot of cultural similarities that I think allow us to look at these experiences in Latin America with a learning cap on. If you look at, all these countries were absolutely devastated by neoliberalism, as is the United States for the workers. There's a huge military idealization in this country, which, obviously when there's unrest and there's people rioting and there's people upset, some of the first people to come and oppress are either the police or the military, the same in Latin America. But it doesn't have to be that way, which I think some people in Latin America have shown, like Jacobo Arbenz, Juan Perón, Hugo Chavez, all these different people. It doesn't have to be that way. And again, these same people spoke of, conditions in their own country. It was never a replica. It was never page 283, line 3, word 6 of Das Kapital, Marx said this, so that's what we're going to do, because that's not how life works. And I see a lot of people on the so-called left rejecting the Bolivarian Revolution or rejecting Peronism because it doesn't do this, that, or the other, which I think is asinine.
Yeah, I mean, ask those people how many revolutions have they led, how many victories they have achieved. So, I mean, it's really easy to be seated at a desk and start, criticizing this and there, but not doing anything. So, I mean, you can say all the experiences, revolutionary experiences in Latin America. I mean, they had their failures, they had things that were not as perfect as they should be, but at least they made the effort and they acted and they were brave in doing so. So I think
it's not no one knows exactly what's going to happen. No one can predict the future. Things fail, some things don't work. Cuba recognized that maybe not every single economic entity should be state-owned. Maybe small restaurants or barber shops, there could perhaps be like a cooperative or a small business element to it. So it's not static. It's not the same. I remember having a conversation in college with an armchair activist, as we call them, and he said, yeah, Venezuela is great and all, but why didn't they get rid of all the oil dependency, etc.? And I'm sitting there like, well, they've been dependent on oil for centuries by no fault of their own. It was imposed on them by, the capitalist powers of the world, especially the United States. And the Bolivarian Revolution had at that time been in power for like 16 years. So it's not really easy to undo something in 16, 15, 20, or 30 years, what has been the law of the land and ingrained in society for 200 years.
Yeah. What would you tell to your fellow Americans? There is this narrative that socialism is always failing and it's impossible and it never works, and all the countries that try socialism ended in bankruptcy, and this narrative. So what would you tell them to convince them that there are successful experiences like China, like Venezuela, even with all the hardship that they are facing right now, but they are still with their own achievements, with Bashar al-Assad in Syria and well, even North Korea and Vietnam. What would you tell these your compatriots, your fellow countrymen or countrywomen?
Well, one I would say is a lot of people in the United States understand what fake news is. They understand that there is a media which is trying to deceive them one way or another. However, they seem to all agree that when these same fake news outlets talk about foreign countries, then they're correct. I would say no. When they lie to you about Trump or they lie to you about Biden, they are also lying to you about Venezuela. How many people in the United States know that the Venezuelan government has built over 3 million homes almost for free for people who did not have adequate housing? 99% of people in Venezuela have electricity. 700 million people in China have been lifted out of poverty. There's free government healthcare for animals in Venezuela. You can take your dog and your cat to get neutered for free, to get dewormed for free, etc. Those animals have better healthcare than the bottom half of people in the United States have. And this is in the wealthiest country in the world. You only have to look down the street from your house in the United States to find the failures of capitalism. Almost everyone knows someone who's fallen victim to the opioid epidemic, people who've died from preventable diseases, people who've gone bankrupt because they couldn't afford medical debt, people who are in student loan debt, people who have credit card debt, people whose wages haven't increased. Everyone sees the failures of capitalism every single day, from the huge medical debt crisis from the small to potholes that can't be fixed in their communities, and their prices of utilities increasing. It is a problem that everyone sees. And these other countries, like if you compare them, like compare China and India, one is unabashedly capitalist and the other one has a planned socialist market economy. One has lifted, as I said, 700 million people out of poverty, with more coming in the future. They have eliminated extreme poverty. Meanwhile, in India, things have gotten no better for the people. Things have gotten no better for the workers, as is the case in much of the Western world. The failures of capitalism are just so far and so many to name. And they constantly talk about the failures, as Fidel Castro said, they constantly talk about the failures of socialism, but they don't talk about the failures of capitalism in Somalia, in Rwanda, in Djibouti, in Turkey, etc. And there's a hegemonic media apparatus which is aiding in this process. And it's not an accident. If it's really amazing the things that socialism has achieved in the world. Even in Brazil, under the Workers' Party, they've electrified the country. They provided tens of millions of people with electricity for the first time. In the United Kingdom, after World War II, the much more radical Labour Party than it is today provided a national health service. It's unfortunate that people don't know the achievements of socialism. Look at all the first things in space: the first man, the first woman, the first animal, the first satellite. Those were achieved not by the United States but by the Soviet Union, which, again, all of its faults aside, they were able to go from a country which was almost completely backward and agrarian to an electrified, steel producing, first person in space, with a higher caloric intake than people in the United States. And that's according to the CIA World Factbook. This isn't the Canary or a left-wing publication saying this. This is the CIA World Factbook. So I would say socialism is a system that has worked. It needs to be a little bit different for different conditions, but the world in which socialism would prevail will be a world that'll be much more just and have much more equity, and people's lives will generally be better.
Yeah, I find it really surprising that many opponents of socialism equate socialism with backwardness or with poverty. And you can see, like, today, China is one of the countries with the greatest number of millionaire people. And you can see, technology in socialist country were really ahead. I mean, it was really ahead from many other capitalist countries. So, the advance in technology, in medicine, in all these good things that we all appreciate, that, people from around the world, whatever the ideology is, appreciate, were available first and in great quality in socialist countries. So it surprises to me, how the media, how the propaganda has influenced, most of the people, and I think it's a challenge for us, you in the States, and me and here in Chile and everywhere, to debunk the myths.
And it's I think it's also interesting how, if you look at the media, why is it that the media constantly talks about Venezuela in the United States? Why is it that they don't talk about Chile ever? They don't talk about any, really, there's a narrative that's being pushed. And I think most Americans do see that there is something weird going on with media, but it's, these are the same people who said that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, that terrible things were happening in Libya and things would be much better if we intervened, etc. And they've done this before and it has never turned out good. And it's also never turned out to be the truth. And so I would just say to a lot of people, Venezuela is currently under conditions that are unseen, that isn't in all-out war, in terms of embargoes, economic sanctions, unilateral coercive measures, the theft, the outright theft of billions of dollars worth of Venezuelan assets abroad, whether it's in the Bank of England or the acquisition of Citgo in the United States. You know, Venezuela was able to provide hundreds of thousands of people in the United States with free or low-cost heating oil when their own government wasn't able to. So also, the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela has been around for a very long time. Well, maybe not in the course of history, but in my lifetime, it's a very long time. It's been around for, upwards of 20 years. Problems have only are fairly new to the Bolivarian process. And not only that, it's, not coincidental that problems showed up as Chavez died, the United States saw an opportunity. There was already very, very small sanctions put in place, but after that, they really took that as their window. Whether they knew Chavez was going to die in that they had a hand in it, I don't have any conclusive proof, but I think it's an interesting idea to look at, because it wouldn't be the first or the last time that they did that. And like I said, things that have been achieved in Venezuela, the building of schools, universal education, universal health care, people were able to see for the very first time through Mission Milagro, in conjunction with Cuban doctors, community clinics, etc. More cities had subway systems than before Chavismo. So these are real material conditions that were improving for the people of Venezuela. And meanwhile, the United States was evicting millions of people in the face of the 2008 financial crisis.
Yeah. How do you see that relation is going to be between the new administration, the Biden administration and Venezuela right now? Is it going to improve or is it going to worsen?
I think that now that there is a Democrat in the White House, I think the chessboard changes a little bit. I don't think things will fundamentally change, but we've seen some lawmakers kind of send letters to the president, people like Ilhan Omar, or I believe Elizabeth Warren also signed one, calling on a revision of the sanctions in the face of COVID-19, et cetera. And that's, well and good, but that doesn't really do anything at the end of the day. They can write a million letters. It doesn't compel the president to do anything. And again, these are a couple lawmakers. Is there a desire for change as a whole in the political establishment in the United States? Probably not. I believe that they probably believe that they would improve by seeing the government overthrown in Venezuela much more than partnering with the government of Venezuela to do some of the things they want to do. I also think, the lobby in Florida between the Gusanos, who are Cubans, or the Esqualidos that are Venezuelan, was a very crucial voting bloc for Trump and Biden. You saw them both appeal over and over again to attacking Venezuela, to attacking Cuba. Trump invited Juan Guaido to the State of the Union. No one else in that room knew who he was, but all that was a nod to the Venezuelans and the Cubans in southern Florida electorally. So, and again, it's a consensus because Juan Guaido then the next day met with Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi. So I don't see much changing. I think our best hope is similar to what happened with Cuba under Obama, a slight thaw. But again, we must remember that was after decades and decades and decades of blockade and embargo. So I don't see much changing in the near future. The longer future, I think, is a bit more of a discussion, but I still don't have much hope there. My hope is much more that Venezuela will become ever more self-sufficient, ever more sovereign, and multilateralism on the world stage will become much more primary than it was in 2013.
I believe we have completed our time for this interview. Is there a final, remark or do you have a message for Chileans or for Latin Americans in general? Would you like to say something?
Well, to Chileans especially, there's an amazing legacy in Chile that I think, in every worker and every youth continues to live on, of Allende. An amazing process, which again was cut short by the United States government and the local oligarchy. To people of Latin America in general, I just want to say thank you for being an example. The last 10 years in Latin America have really been a beacon of light, of hope, between Fernando Lugo, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, Lula, Dilma, Hugo Chavez, Nicolás Maduro, Evo Morales. It's endless. And these processes have seen tens of millions of people lifted out of poverty. And I understand that people want to make criticisms. Humans are inclined to be unhappy with their current conditions no matter what. But your worst day under, a progressive, a national, a popular government is, much better than your best day under neoliberal capitalism, as shown in the United States, as shown in Latin America. Look at Argentina. They, a media war, outright media war, U.S. involvement, etc., caused the Peronist candidate in 2015 to lose. And with that came an economic crisis, hunger, unemployment, inflation, debt, etc. And now the Peronists are now trying their best to do it. So I just want to say thank you. I want to say gracias a todos y todas en América Latina, peronistas, allendistas, chavistas, todos y todas, ustedes, líderes y ejemplos para nosotros, para todos los pueblos del mundo. Sinceramente.
Me siento honrado. I feel honored for these kind words of you. And I also like to, to encourage the American working class, the American people, to fight for a better country, fight for a better world. I believe it's possible. I believe that true freedom, it's the freedom from, the needs that they are actually facing, and this can only be achieved by collective effort. And I mean, if I believe America, the United States of America, is a really Christian nation, so they should also follow Jesus Christ as the first revolutionary, the man who preached against the big oligarchs and fought and died for the oppressed. So that's my message for my fellow American friends.
And I hope it becomes a reality. As Evita said, God is always on the side of the oppressed. But I hope to be back again. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think it would be really great.
Oh, I enjoy it too. So you are very welcome to visit Chile whenever you want. I will be hoping to receive you, and my comrades will also receive you and take you around, so you can know our country and talk more about the fun stuff and all that. But it's been a pleasure. So to everyone, thank you very much for watching this. And if you like the video, please click like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.